Wait a Minute with John Wilcock. Well, if any of my regular 3 viewers are watching, they will notice that I tidied myself up this week. I combed my hair, I had a shave. My trouble is vanity, not the vanity of wanting to look good all the time, but the total indifference to how I look. I don't give a shit. If I haven't shaved, it doesn't matter. It's still me talking, you know. Anyway, so I was reading the New York Times the other day, which is so far superior to the LA Times. It's like comparing apples and oranges. And I noticed again that the New York Times devotes about a quarter of the page or a third of the page on page 2 to saying what's in the paper. Some bright spark at the LA Times, some genius, decided that what they should do is devote not 1 page but pages 2 and 3 to what's in the paper. In other words, first of all you read page 2 and 3 to see what's in the paper, and then you read the rest of the pages to read it. And when I started studying those things on page 2 and 3, I realized it's even stupider than that. They've obviously appointed some bright young intern to write little pieces. In other words, to write stories about stories, for God's sake, making them as appealing as possible. So you read these little stories and then you turn to the stories in the paper and read those. Now, how lame is that? If they've got so much space they don't know what to do with it, why don't they start covering some of the things they don't cover? Anyway, the New York Times is so highly superior, as I said, and one of the things that impressed me the other day was a whole bunch of fabulous letters, in one of which the guy pointed out that everybody knew about Bush at the end of his first term. You know, we all knew him well enough to know that his response to tragedy and adversity would be to promote and flatter the incompetent and admire and ignore the advice of cooler heads. Those who disapprove now but who voted to re-elect Mr. Bush have gotten what they voted for and should be apologizing to those who knew better when it mattered most a year and a half ago. Then somebody else points out that he spoke to a voter from Missouri who said, I just voted for Bush because he's a Republican. And this guy adds, it is hard to believe in this complex day and age that people still vote along party lines and for no other reason, you know. Anyway, so what do we have this week? Oh, my friend Sasha, incidentally, says he doesn't even read the New York Times because of the Judith Miller stuff. But I tried to point out to him that if it wasn't for the New York Times, we wouldn't get letters like that, and those letters reach a couple of million people, so just ignoring the paper because there's something about it you don't like. In the same way we argued about Bill O'Reilly, because Bill O'Reilly is a jerk and obnoxious and stands for everything I don't stand for. As I think I remarked once before, he's like a cleaned up Trump, what the hell's his name? Limbaugh, you know, Rush Limbaugh. But he does say some sensible things occasionally. Like I quoted recently, he said, I give you 2 words today, French Revolution, implying that things were so bad it's about time we had a real revolution. Anyway, so what do we have? What do we have this week is that Bush has proved once and again that he feels that laws don't apply to him, that he's above the law, that what he does is decide what he wants to do or not want to do and then bring in the legal experts to justify it for him. And it's a pathetic situation, and it's very hard to know how to deal with that. But by the way, somebody called that reverse engineering, which I thought was kind of good. Reverse engineering, decide what you want to do and then make a legal justification for it, because he personally appoints these people. So anyway, well, we're in the little village of Tivoli, little town of Tivoli, about an hour out of Rome, and I'm about to visit the famous Villa d'Este. My destination is d'Este. The entrance hall here to Villa d'Este used to be the cloister of a Benedictine convent. It would be nice to think the nuns used to bathe in this huge tub here, but it seems unlikely. And this figure, this beautiful carved figure here, is a sleeping Venus and dates back from the 2nd century. That means it's 1800 years old. Onwards into the gardens. A route that goes through some galleries which seem to stretch to infinity. The usual kind of sculptures and things on the walls. I don't think I'll pay too much attention to them, but the murals are kind of nice. And the ceiling, of course, is highly decorated. This spiral staircase is kind of incredible and goes round and round and round. A series of corridors. This room's the hunting room with appropriate pictures. Seems to have been a festive occasion. At intervals you can walk outside and look over the balcony, see the countryside, see the Tibetan mountain, I think it's called, and other visitors admiring the view. The gardens go on for a long way, and although it's a steep climb down and a steep climb back, in the service of my viewers, I will do that. Mainly because you have to see the fountains. Now you just learned three words you didn't know, all meaning the same thing. Every now and then there's a view of distant fountains, which of course we will eventually come to. Now here are two little grottos named after nymphs, and the nymphs themselves have been removed and are in the respectively the Vatican Museum and the Louvre. Grottos are flanked by this sculpture here, which I don't know anything about and I don't see any explanation of. Oh yes, it's called Furrows, F-U-R-R-O-W-S, and was done in 1965. This is the mythical winged horse Pegasus, which apparently landed on Mount Olympus and beat the ground with his hooves to allow the water to flow. Seems a good place to stop and have my sandwich. Of course there are plenty of places to eat, including a fairly pricey restaurant in the on the terrace of the gardens itself, and but that's I brought a sandwich because it's much easier to do that. Sandwich and an orange, and I'm sat by the horse and I just finished it off, and I'm going to return to the fountains. The bus ride was took about an hour. It wasn't very pleasant. It was very crowded. Couldn't really get a seat. Nearly all the seats were taken by small children with the parents, while all the older people had to stand. No concept of giving up your seat to the old here. And it took about an hour. As I said, it only was a €1.60. It's about 2:30 something like that, $2.30 each way, so pretty reasonable. The admission to the gardens was €9. Divide by a third and add that, so $12. It would have been cheaper had I been a European, had I said I was from Europe instead of saying I was from California. Could have had a discount if I was from Europe, but that's life. And those fountains down there are what we're aiming for. A spectacular line of them. But there are a few other sites along the way. It's a long drop, including going through another archway. The temperature and all the water flowing tends to make you thirsty, so it would be ironic if there wasn't anywhere to drink. And now, as we go through here, the greatest wonder of all, in my opinion, in the 15th century, or rather in the 1500s when all this was built, everybody was suitably impressed by the cardinal's efforts, and the composer Liszt even composed a musical fountain, or at least composed the music for a fountain. Once upon a time it even played music, but alas, no longer. Now this path is 130 meters, that's roughly 150 feet long. Fountains all the way along. And what's interesting is that there are 3 separate canals. And out of the top one comes that, and that. And then there's a central canal with little rivulets coming out of. And then there's a bottom one with even more. So it's called the 100 Fountains. Let me look at the thing here. It's called, yeah, the 100 Fountains, just as I thought. Okay. Of course, there isn't many waterfalls as there are fountains, technically speaking. Down yet more steps. Come all the way down from the top, down to here. And after I left the horse, I turned the corner, went down a bit, and then came all the way down these steps. And now this is the final batch. But of course I persevere because there are surprises around almost every corner. Or at least around every corner, new examples of fast-moving water. The Villa d'Este. God, what a place. I've been to a lot of countries. I usually write about them for I used to do insight guides, which are the ones with all the color pictures in. They're very pretty. I've done most of this country, most of the US for that, including a book on all the western states, or everything west of the Mississippi. And then I did one east of the Mississippi, but I didn't publish that one because the west one didn't sell well enough. But I've done books on California and Seattle and Vancouver and Mexico and Texas and Las Vegas and heaven knows what. And so once I stopped doing Insight Guide, which was about the beginning of this year, towards the end of last year, after 14 years, I started incidentally on the New York Times. I think I mentioned that, but I worked originally for Froma doing the $5 a day books. And so I've been a travel writer almost all my life. And when I quit working for Insight, I kept traveling and I kept writing because I have a column every week, which is on my website, where you probably found this show. And I also do a monthly magazine called the Ojai Orange, which is a personal magazine and is not on sale and is not commercial and doesn't carry ads and goes to my friends all over the world. And so I write a lot of travel for that, and I wrote about Costa Rica and Hawaii and Mexico and Malaysia and a lot of places, including Japan and China. And in China, all kinds of umbrellas, all kinds of colors, all on the way to or from the Great Buddha. This is Wait a Minute, your Sometimes Travel show. Hi, John Wilcock. I'm standing in front of the Great Buddha. You also by proxy. We're at Kamakura, about an hour south of Tokyo. And the Great Buddha is 37 feet tall and the largest Buddha in the world. The Buddha has sat through this for hundreds of years, but nothing deters the crowds, even rain like this. Well, I lost my way a bit on the way back to the station, and got absolutely soaked. I'm now standing in the toilet in McDonald's by the station. I'm going to get a hamburger before I go back. The Daibutsu's been there a thousand years at least. Kamakura was a little tiny town. It was Kamakura's capital 1,000 years ago, but not for very long. Then it went to Edo, which was the name for Tokyo. When I came here in the 60s, it was quite a small, quiet place. Now it's real busy. I don't know if I mentioned, but the Daibutsu used to be in a large wooden hut, but a typhoon or hurricane or something came along and washed it away hundreds of years ago, and so it's been in the open weathering the storm ever since then. Well, of course, now that I've made that tiring expedition in the pouring rain, it stopped raining. If I'd arrived an hour earlier or an hour later, I would have missed it all. Anyway, I remember just after I arrived seeing this fabulous food store and some blue cheese, so I'm off down there to get that. There's virtually no food from anywhere in the world that you can't find in Japan if you go looking for it. This is a cute little place, I thought. Coffee and beer. And to your health. And Starbucks is everywhere, but then you knew that, didn't you? The ubiquitous Colonel too. They're great for recycling with different containers for different things. I don't know what that's beckoning me to. Oh, it's just a garden shop. I called in Mr. Donut to get 2 angel cream donuts, which are delicious, filled with lovely cream. Even though I'm standing on the railway platform, there's an ad moving in front of me. This seems to be for a dress shop. Waiting for the train to take me back to Tokyo. Opening a party at the art centre, and this here is the line for food. It's only just after 6, so I guess I got here too late unless I want to line up for 20 minutes. Anyway, this is always a nice place. They have music too. You realize that I sometimes run pieces of tape that are from other shows, and therefore I don't necessarily introduce them. You'll get used to that if you see the show regularly. There's always surprises. It's not called Wait a Minute for no reason. Wait a minute means wait a minute and something else will come along. Listen to this guy. When I place or receive a call, Blue Phone Elite automatically pauses my iTunes player and zooms it when I'm done. It shows me caller ID and allows me to ignore or take calls from my computer. I can initiate calls using contacts from my Apple address book, and I can read and send SMS text messages without picking up the phone. Get a life, man. His whole life is devoted to technical things and mechanical devices. I do actually have a feature which I run occasionally called Why Don't They? For example, there was a move to maybe stop making the penny, And of course, with typical government fashion, I suppose they will probably pass resolutions and go to all kinds of red tape. Why don't they just stop making them? Because if they stop making them, there are millions and billions around, but they'll gradually grow less and less and more in demand and more valuable. And instead of being worth less than a penny, which is what they cost, which is what they are now to make, they will eventually become a valuable collector's item. Missouri execution ban stands. They can't execute people in several states because they can't figure out who's going to give the anesthetic and why it you know, maybe the guy is in pain before he passes out. I mean, why don't they just double the sedative, you know, so that the guy passes out? Another thing, finally, the telephone company are such morons, you know. I mean, they're always running out of area code numbers. Now, if they'd had some forethought in the first place and decided to allow a separate area code for cell phones and stuff like that, they wouldn't have run out by now. But anyway, that's life. Okay, I'm going to finish up with a bit of Ojai Parade, and that'll be it for this week. I hope you watch every week. Bye.
I really got that feeling.
Wait a minute, with John Wilcock.